I'm Dean Newlund, and welcome to the Business of Intuition, where I coach, facilitate, train, and speak on the hard science and meaningful experience of intuitive leadership in business, so you can make better decisions, forge real connections, and creatively solve problems to amplify your impact and simplify your life. Welcome to the Business of Intuition.
One of my very first jobs right out of college back in Minneapolis was to be a marketing and development director for a small theater called Brass Tacks. The development side meant that I was in charge of raising money, usually through grants and also through high net worth organizations and people. I soon realized just how difficult it was to be able to identify the right high net worth people because there were so many of them. It was hard to find out who they were. It was often who you knew that made those connections. And me being a guy fresh out of college, I didn't know very many people. I could only imagine that on the other side of the fence back then, as a high net worth person or organization, that there must be hundreds and hundreds of nonprofits out there that need my money. So then the question is, how do these two different groups or peoples connect? How do we be able to link the high net worth person with the nonprofit they want to serve? And so my next guest on the Business of Intuition is that connector, is that mediator, is that consultant that can train and support these people who want to do good in the world with their money, with the nonprofit that wants to use their money to be able to do good. Of course, we know that there's very different mindsets and backgrounds and skills of both sides, and be able to bring them together in a very positive, effective, and powerful way is a trick in of itself. Now, my next guest is going to talk about some of those pitfalls and tips and lessons learned. But as I soon began to realize in talking to her that a lot of these skills that she's talking about are transferable to people who are in organizations whereby they have to work with two different teams who want limited resources for a common goal. And then how do you navigate and negotiate two different groups of people within an organization in a way that is effective, in a way that moves us forward in a positive and speedy way? So two different scenarios here that we're going to talk about in this particular episode of the Business of Intuition. My guest's name is Sybil Ackerman-Munson, and she is a nonprofit professional and foundation advisor. She founded Do Your Good, an LLC dedicated to helping individuals and businesses make lasting, meaningful contributions to the world. And this year, she has launched her Crack the Code course, which is a step-by-step set of lessons on how to build a philanthropic life. Sybil Ackerman-Munson on the Business of Intuition. So, Sybil, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks. It's an honor.
Yeah, it's great. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. There's a lot here. So as I understand it, you in a sense are a broker with a group of people that are high net worth individuals who want to do good, to change the world in some ways, and they feel that they can because they have some resources to provide. They don't have the time, they don't have the energy, they don't have the know-how, they don't even know where to put it. And so then you get approached by dozens of different nonprofit organizations to be able to say, hey, I understand you got some money from people. We would like to tap into that. Do I have a pretty good synopsis of how you work?
So, Dean, the way you describe that's great. Let me just add a few things. The first thing is, so there's a lot of people out there like me, but you've probably never really heard of people like me.
No, right.
Because we're very much in the background. But what we do in our profession is we represent the client who has the high net worth that wants to give money away. And we support them in giving away money to nonprofits, to the cause they care about, in a way that does not waste their money, leave money on the table, or end up causing the nonprofits more time than is worth it for them to even be seeking those funds. Because we're experts in a particular field, And so let's say for me, my expertise is in natural resources and environmental work. So that's actually where my clients usually hire me for those reasons. And they'll come to me and they'll say, we care about forestry. We care about clean water. You name it. And then I say, okay, let's first sit down and do a process where we think about, okay, you say you care about forestry or forests. What part of that do you care about? Okay, now I know 7 or 8 different nonprofits that work on this, and I connect you with those nonprofits. And then since I know your personality as the donor, I can then help make sure that the nonprofits that come in front of you are ones that you actually will care about, because there's hundreds of nonprofits that work on forest issues. So if you didn't have an intermediary like me and you said, I care about forests, you'd get hounded, or not hounded is the wrong word, but you'd get so many inquiries, and more than half of them would be things that you didn't even really care about. And then what I've seen happen is you either say, oh my gosh, put your hands up in the air. I'm really busy with daily life. I can't deal. I'm just not going to give. Or what happens is you can give to the wrong groups, maybe the groups that might look the flashiest and the best fundraisers, but they might not even actually be doing the work that you care about on the ground. They just know how to make a pitch to make it sound like they do. There can be lots of things like that. So that's what I do. And I really help with that as the intermediary.
So I'm I'm an individual with a high net worth, and I want to give money to some cause that I feel very passionate about. You mentioned earlier that sometimes you can give money to an organization that does almost more harm than good, or that is wasted. What does that mean? What is the criteria that would say, I just gave this organization $1 million, now I'm doing more harm than good? Tell me more about what that looks like.
Okay, the number one trap that people get into is, let's say they had $1 million and they gave it to an organization that seemed to fit the bill, but they didn't do their due diligence in a way that proved that that organization actually works well with others. Okay.
Works well with others. What do you mean?
Other nonprofits in the field.
Why is that
work on?
Why is that an important criteria?
Yeah. So this is an example of when it can go badly. So let's say you care about an issue in general. So let's say it's houselessness or forest issues. There are always going to be multiple organizations working together on that cause. And so if you say, I care about this, but then there's only one group that comes to you and you give them $1 million, they don't work well with others. And then they all of a sudden have $1 million more than everybody else. And they start dictating then their outcomes. If the issue is local and $1 million is a lot of money for this issue, it depends on the scale, of course. They can start dictating the outcomes. So they say, well, we have this $1 million and we're going to do X. And maybe every other group doesn't think that that's the right way to go. And so what'll happen is the groups will start battling with each other, and your $1 million will have been the thing that ends up getting the groups battling with each other, rather than having everybody work together in collaboration towards common cause.
So even though let's say there's 5 different nonprofits in the, like let's say it's forestry, for example, or something to that effect, and I give $1 million to nonprofit A, and there's another 4 who are in that area of expertise, but I'm not giving it to the other 4. I'm just giving it to the one. And so you're still saying that even though it's only going to one, the others who are in that industry, if they are not collaborating and working well together, that can actually be a problem.
It can. It can if you haven't done the due diligence to make sure that you've talked to all the different nonprofits and also experts who may be in that same field that aren't asking you for money, but can tell you which groups are doing what, so that you can make sure that you're giving that $1 million to an organization that's moving forward in collaboration. Because if they're just pushing their agenda and they have extra money to just push their agenda and no one else agrees with it, they're going to hit a brick wall. Sometimes what'll happen is when you do that due diligence and you say, okay, I have about $1 million to give to this issue I care about. And you start talking around, you realize, oh, instead of giving $1 million to one group, I'll divvy it up into 4. And I'll give a little bit less to each of the 4, but they'll all work together and be able to work towards something. Yeah. Or all 4 groups will say, Sybil, we care about forestry, and the big gap is there's not enough information about how trees are important for water quality. I'm being very simplistic, but That's the issue. All four of us organizations working on this issue would benefit from that. Can you do $1 million to do a communications? So we all four together can contract a communications firm to promote this issue, because what that'll do is it'll help us raise money from other donors. So you're not only just doing this, this, and this, you're helping us there. So that's where people hire me to then do that due diligence and talk with all the experts, talk with all the different nonprofits, and then figure out where that best placement of the $1 million for the cause you care about would be, so that you could move that forward. And that's what people like me do. Now, you can do that on your own as a donor. The thing is, you have to have that kind of expertise and trust in the community that people who are the intermediaries like me usually do have, because we come from the nonprofit community in the local area where you are. And I have no interest in promoting one nonprofit over another, because I'm working for you as your support.
You're staying specific to a particular issue or cause, right? You're not,
yes.
To your point, I think earlier you said that you have a particular niche in
Yes.
Okay. But
Dean,
Dean,
Dean, I would love to take a step back from that, because
okay.
I love you're asking about, like, what's the role of a person like me in my job?
Yeah.
I've been doing that job that I just described for over a decade, and I love it. I love working with the families I work with. It is so rewarding. I love working with the nonprofits. But over the years, I've been sitting in so many trustee meetings. I've been pitched by hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of nonprofits. I've worked on so many different issues. I said to myself, I have a responsibility, because I start seeing trends, and I start seeing effective ways to do things in general and ineffective ways to do things in general. So what I also have been trying to do is I created a new arm of my business called Do Your Good. In that arm of my business, I'm not focusing on issues. I'm not focusing on environment and natural resource issues. I'm focusing on structural questions of how to give money away effectively, so that even if you're a donor who may not have the ability to hire someone like me as your intermediary, you can take some of the things I've learned to be an effective giver and be able to do it on your own a little bit. So that because having an intermediary like me who's an expert, it's not inexpensive. And sometimes you want to try to do things on your own so you can put the money directly into the community. So that's why I created mini courses. I have a podcast series where I talk to people about effective giving. And I can talk to you a little bit about some of the things that I teach and that side of things during this podcast as well, some of the high level things, because I feel like that could be helpful maybe for folks who are listening to this podcast, want to do good in the world, but maybe like, oh my gosh, I can't hire an intermediary like Sybil at this point. But it's been my creative outlet, and it makes me very happy to do.
So let me ask you too. I would love to get to that. My mind is now racing here a little bit.
Oh, I love that, Dean. That's great.
So a lot of the focus is on the giver. It sounds like the courses and the consulting and the intermediary work that you do, and the strategy that goes behind that. That sounds like a great idea. And the other side of this equation, the other partner in this is the nonprofit, right?
Yes.
And so you're sort of boosting up the acuity, the sophistication, the clarity on the other side, the investor. What's your take on the nonprofit and where their growth might be? I mean, what works on the nonprofit side? What's not working on the nonprofit side? Is the model the right model? Are there certain nonprofit models that work and don't work? And oh, by the way, investor, you're getting better, but you also really need to realize that there's some aspects of our nonprofit system within this country that may not always do what they propose to do, not out of any malice, just because there's a system that sort of prevents a certain amount of sophistication and growth, and quite frankly, in some cases, maybe even a level of business acumen that allows for this particular nonprofit to do the mission at the level that they want. So I'm throwing in some of my own thoughts on this, but I want to get your own ideas.
Yeah, no, I really love all that. And there's a lot of things in there. Let's click them off a little bit one by one.
Yeah, sure.
First, our nonprofit model in the country is something that in the United States has strengths and weaknesses. And the strengths are that the nonprofit model allows people who want to do good in the world to do that without having to seek profit motive. And they can incentivize getting gifts because they're a nonprofit. The people who give the gifts can get a tax deduction. So that's really a cool thing. And I love that idea. There's some challenges inherent in this. One is what you said, Dean. When you go into the nonprofit space, you don't necessarily get trained in business acumen, but the conflicting tension here is that the nonprofit business model, it's still a corporate model. And so even though the ultimate outcome is doing good in the world and no profit, the entire structure is modeled after a for-profit corporation. And so this inherently has some challenges. One is that the people going into the nonprofit space, like I said before, aren't already trained in business. Sometimes they've even eschewed business classes in school. If they've gone to a graduate level institution, they're sort of like, no, I just want to do good. And to get those degrees, you don't have to do any business courses. I think that's a challenge for people. And then the structure inherently sets nonprofits up to compete against each other.
Limited resources. Yeah.
Right. Even though in order to get any of this stuff done, they need to collaborate because the causes they're working on are so big. So no one nonprofit can do it alone. But in the for-profit world, there's a little more competition that's sort of healthy because it's just it's premised on a different model, but we're sort of shoehorning the do-good people into a model that has some cracks in it. Thinking that we can stop there, but I have other things too.
Yeah. Oh, there's so much here. Oh my God. Yeah. So the word nonprofit has, at least in my perspective, it reflects basically a tax status. It's what you report to the IRS.
Yes.
And it is the way you're, from a tax perspective, is set up. But it's also been described as a industry or a kind of organization that says that we should not have profit. So it begins to create a mindset that profit is not good. In a way, we kind of create that perspective. I wonder about this sometimes. And so then if we are at the end of a quarter and we end up with more money than we had expenses, right? We have a profit per se, right? Then there's something inherently wrong with that we need to distribute it quickly. Versus, this is where I think my perspective is, I'm going to get your thought is, what about it's okay to make a profit, even though your tax structure is to be nonprofit, to be able to reinvest back into the organization for scale, getting people who are really, really talented, who we pay them what they really need to be paid because they come with that knowledge, that expertise, that we're not all, quote unquote, sorry for being so controversial, we're not sort of living hand to mouth. We're not poor, if you will, in our mindset and how we pay each other. And that the profit is actually something we do need to create in order to invest in each other and invest in our structure, our marketing. Ultimately, by the scale of that, we can serve more people and do more good.
Yes. And that's something that's a big issue. And there's this conflict in the nonprofit space where certain people who go into the nonprofit sector, first of all, folks in the nonprofit sector get paid way less than the governmental sector and the
absolutely
sector.
Exactly. So that's part of the problem.
And so you lose people, but also people who do stay, sometimes there can be this mentality of it's a really bad thing to make money. When I was in the nonprofit sector, that was so strong in there. And I would feel guilty about feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm getting paid so little. And I didn't feel like I could even say anything to my bosses about wanting to get paid more. Now that's changing over the years because I'm older now. So I think that people are recognizing that challenge. Right. And there is a reality that just nonprofits don't have as much money as that's not true all the time. I'm thinking more local, smaller nonprofits don't have as much money as some of their neighboring businesses that are for profit. However, I do think that I see a lot of times, first of all, donors can really incentivize a positive culture in the nonprofit they care about. So I do this with my clients. I look at the nonprofits always submit budgets when they ask for funding, and you can tell pretty fast how they're doing. And a lot of times an organization will be doing well and they'll say, hey, this has been a boom year. We're thinking about hiring new people. I serve as a sort of informal advisor to nonprofits who'll call me up and they'll be like, I'm thinking of hiring someone, but we're right in the middle of COVID. Do you think we should do this? But if I hire a development director, it's going to help us raise even more money. I mean, there's always those kind of assessments. So a good nonprofit is always thinking about that. And now we're dealing with inflation at the moment. And so a lot of the good executive directors are coming to me and saying, we want to pay our people more. Is there a way that your donors can maybe support us a little bit more than usual so that we can like increase our salary range? So there are really good nonprofits thinking about this kind of work. The thing is that with this, I try to incentivize people, nonprofit people who are leaders, to talk to me about this. One of the challenges as a donor that you can have, though, is if you come across as someone who's giving, but giving with scarcity. So you're like, I only have this much money, and how, If you say that to them, which has happened before with donors, they're like, we don't have enough. Then what happens is that the nonprofits then go into their limiting mindset and they don't start trying to think expansively. So as a donor, you can really help. I have a couple stories on this. One is just the story I just told you, is that nonprofits will come to me, we'll talk about it. Then I go back to the donors and I say, here, this nonprofit might need a little extra money this year, or let's support them in XYZ way. The other thing is to think about, for example, executive director burnout in nonprofits. There's very high turnover with executive directors.
Right.
We find when my clients find an executive director that we think is amazing and that is in danger of burning out, maybe it's not always just about a salary raise. Maybe it's about incentivizing them and their board to support the executive director to have a sabbatical. Or maybe there's an extra boost in a grant we can give where we specifically say we're doing this because this executive director and your team is amazing in general. Yeah. And maybe think about, we can't direct them to do anything, but maybe think about, a staff retreat. We would not look badly upon that if you decided to do that, to make sure they know that they didn't have to just do only programming with our funding, that they can be creative with it because their staff are so amazing. So there's a lot of things you can do as a donor, but you have to do it with a lot of sensitivity and trust in the organization, because the thing we don't want to have as a donor is to dictate terms. And that's something, that's when the nonprofits can get really grumpy with us, and they have for good reason, when we come in there and we dictate terms. And I've made mistakes myself in getting a little too enthusiastic about an issue. Luckily, the nonprofits I work with know me well enough. They can be like, Sybil, you're out of bounds. And I'm like, oops, sorry.
Yeah. Well, let me
make mistakes.
Let me take a little pivot here, because I think that there are going to be some people who are listening to this who are in nonprofits or who are donors and would go, this is fascinating, and I'm glad I got this information. Of course, we'll provide your contact information as well on this. But I wanted sort of to take another slice at this conversation from a different perspective. So you actually are dealing with two very different groups.
You got it. Mm-hmm.
Two very different mindsets.
Yep.
With a common goal, but maybe with different approaches, different mindsets, different challenges, and so forth. So I'm thinking, all right, taking myself out of this particular situation and say, well, I'm a manager, I'm a leader within an organization. I have to broker two different groups who are wanting the same set of resources. Mm-hmm. And I know that this is a negotiation. This is a mediation. I have to understand both points of view. I have to speak for one. I have to speak for the other from a perspective of a person in an organization who has to be, in a way, doing some of the things that you're doing, but, in their own world. What sort of advice might you have for being that middle person to help bring two different groups together?
Yes, there's two parts to that. One is, how do you talk to me as the middle person if you're a nonprofit, so that I can broker it? And then if you're the nonprofit, how do you actually talk directly to the donors? If I'm out of
how do you help in that process? Again, we're using now the nonprofit as the metaphor for something else. Yeah,
exactly. So I actually created, when I first started my business and on the Do Your Good side to help donors give away money effectively, what happened was a lot of nonprofits started reaching out to me. So I created a special mini course just for nonprofits. And I'm also writing right now what I call a limited edition email sequence. That's a 6-month long email sequence where every week a nonprofit gets a special tip from me in their inbox. And it's a substantial tip on how to hone their pitch so that they can really make a difference. So there's a lot there, but let me give you the high level conversation I have with nonprofits about this. The first thing is you 100% as a nonprofit need to know the kind of donor you're talking to. In my over a decade of experience, I've found that there's 3 distinct types of donors. And if you talk to the one wrong, you're not going to even get in the door. So the 3 types of donors are, there's a donor that's called a sustainer donor. Those are donors that just love your group. They'll fund you year after year. They're actually the stereotypical donor that people think exists in the world. People tend to make the mistake of thinking that all donors are sustainer donors, that if you just show them about everything you do, that they're just going to want to fund you. There's things you have to do to make sure that they care, but those are sort of things that people teach to. There's 2 other kinds of donors that are really important to try to capture. One's called a campaigner donor. A campaigner donor is somebody who may or may not care about you and your organization, but they care about a cause. They care about houselessness, climate change. You may be working on that cause, but they want a 1 to 2 year project budget that explains how you and your organization is going to overcome an obstacle in the way of success for that cause. So yeah.
So let me go back to the metaphor that I'm trying to set up here, right? So getting out of the direct reference to nonprofits and donors and going into, say, an organization, I would think if I could restate what you said, if there's 2 different groups that have to work together, if I listen to what you said, these 2 groups really need to understand the needs of the other group. We have to have a communication. We need to be able to understand the overall goal that we both share, but we have to have empathy and sensitivity to what makes this person tick, what makes this group tick, and what is it in it for them. And we have to have that same conversation heading in the other direction. Donors versus nonprofits.
Dean, people say that, what you're saying all the time. And the problem is that I think nonprofits get lost in the sea of that. They say, you need to understand who you're talking to. So what they do, and this is what they do with me, is they'll look up like on the website, they'll look at the guidelines, they'll do all these different things, but it won't really get them in the door. And that's because they make the mistake of not understanding if their donor is a sustainer, campaigner, or what I call a launcher donor. And the launcher donors want to fill in gaps. They only want to hear about the things you think are missing. And they're like the venture capitalists of the donor world. So that's what I'm trying to say too, Dean, and I'm totally supporting what you're saying is, all too often, I feel like nonprofits are swimming in a sea of trying to figure out, they're like, we know we need to be empathetic. We know we need to pitch our wares effectively. And we're so frustrated because we'll be talking to somebody and all they care about is an issue that we think we're doing, but they're not showing them their project. They're just talking generally. And so it really clicked for me that's actually why I created Do Your Good. I'm like, I need to explain to people that there's 3 different types of donors. And if you're a donor, you need to be clear about which of the 3 you are so that nonprofits can access you appropriately. And then if you're a nonprofit, you need to know what kind of donor you're talking to so you know how to access them appropriately. And as a person that's in the intermediary world, I work for sustainer, campaigner, and launcher donors. And so over my career, I've made sure that when I talk about dockets for each of them, who they should fund, I always tier it to whatever kind of donor I'm talking to support them and being able to make the best gifts that they know how to give. So that's the different thing that I have to offer, because I always, in my nonprofit world and in my donor world, people so often would tell me there's only one way to give. You do it X, Y, Z way. I have the silver bullet training, and there is no one way to give. It depends on the kind of person you're talking to. But then there are some categories of types of people you're talking to that I think can really help break down those barriers.
So in some ways, if I go back to, the great information on the nonprofit donors conversation, if I were to translate some of those lessons over to a business that is not in this kind of space, that I would say that we all probably have to have a little bit of your skills. We need to be able to understand a lot of things that you're talking about, but in our space, we need to be able to make those negotiations and those connections in that specific, and again, towards a common goal, towards what are we all shooting for here, And I think sometimes I wonder, what I've noticed, at least with organizations, that we don't really define what the goal is, so we all have our own particular point of view on that. We assume that we understand what the problem we're trying to solve is, but when you really dig into it, we realize that we have different perspectives on that. And I think before you get into any sort of solution mode regarding whether it's profit, nonprofit, whether it's working with a donor, is like, do we understand what we're really here to do? Or are we assuming that we do and we find out later we don't? So
exactly. I love that, Dean. And the other thing is just what I find sometimes is when people are missing the mark, either donors or nonprofits, the mistake they make is they get grumpy. They're like, well, I'm giving them everything they need.
Right. And why is it not working? Why aren't they accepting it in the intention that I would hope? Right. And so, and they come with different
fitting into my model rather than thinking about
I'm trying to help,
model.
damn it.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, listen, Sybil, tell me how people can connect with you and follow sort of the work that you're about.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So, I have these courses for donors and for nonprofits, and that is in my Do Your Good part of my business. And I also have a weekly podcast that's on all the streaming channels where I think about all these questions of how to give effectively. And you just can find me at Do Your Good. So it's online, doyourgood.com, or Instagram and Facebook is the handle Do Your Good. So it's pretty easy. And all same with the podcast. It's named Do Your Good.
Is that the name of the podcast?
Yep.
That's
Do Your
so
Good.
Simple.
Everything is that, right?
That's
and
great.
Then I also help clients one-on-one, donors, to help them give money away effectively. And occasionally I also support nonprofits. If the nonprofit is not already a grantee of my clients, I will support them in sort of thinking through how to hone their pitch and that kind of thing too. So it's super fun. I love what I do. And I'm so honored to be on your podcast today, Dean. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, pleasure's mine too.
Thank you for listening to The Business of Intuition. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to learn more about Dean or Mission Facilitators Leadership, go to mfileadership.com. That's mfileadership.com.